This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Amantara Ethnobotanicals. Head over to amantara.com to learn more. This is the Psychedelics Then and Now podcast with Zach Leary, a Psychedelics Today podcast. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Psychedelics Then and Now podcast. This is Zach Leary, your host. So happy to be back with you guys. Missed you, love you. Happy to be back. On this episode of the podcast, we have an all-new interview. We're welcoming back Dr. Joe Tafur, who is talking about his book, Medicine Song, Spiritual Healing and the Psychedelic Renaissance. I love Joe Tafur so much. He is such an amazing embodiment of shamanic knowledge with Western medicine, and does so with so much grace, humility, wisdom, and approachability. More about Joe in just a little bit. As usual, if you're interested in anything I'm doing, please visit zachleary.net. My psychedelic studies course begins again on June 17th. I'm doing a 3-part online workshop with the Shulgin Foundation entitled Ceremonial Synthetics, which we did part 1 this week, and part 2 is on May 19th. It was a lot of fun. We had a great time. Just great community, great questions. Really enjoyed it. And of course, our partners in this podcast, Psychedelics Today, they're always doing so many amazing things in this world. So head on over to their website too. So lots happening in the psychedelic world, right? Unless you've been living under a rock and you missed it. Trump signed an executive order that allowed the FDA to, or not just allowed, mandated the FDA to fast-track psychedelic applications for the treatment of mental health. It was really really inspired, and the momentum was really given through Ibogaine and the Americans for Ibogaine initiative, which is bringing Ibogaine to treat PTSD for our veteran community, right? So there was a huge veterans push behind this. Obviously a lot of other compounds go into this as well. Psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, and hopefully this can repair a lot of the missives that have happened in the past. The FDA approval of MDMA did not pass a couple of years ago, but maybe this time it will. It's a complicated issue for sure. And there's no other intro on the podcast today. I'm just going to talk about it. I find this to be a victory. I won't say otherwise. It's hard for me just to, say, no, this is not a victory. I understand that it is a victory of some kinds, but I also think that we have to ask some bigger questions around it too, and really look at the reality of the psychedelic matrix as it enters this new phase within FDA approval in the medicalized model. Number one, psychedelics were not reclassified. Let's be very clear about that. They are still Schedule 1 compounds. This did nothing to change the illegality around that or the decriminalization around that period. Sure, later on, if some of the FDA approvals, and this goes into the mental health infrastructure, maybe that can change rescheduling later on, but that did not happen now. And also I want to point out that, getting any drug through FDA approval takes tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is no exception for psychedelics, right? So the companies that can afford to do this, that can afford to go through the FDA process, fast-tracked or not. They are giant corporadelic, pharmadelic players that are incredibly well bankrolled, that are set up to profitize off of psychedelic healing, right? So, that invites in some really complicated questions around the medicalized model, right? If you're profitizing psychedelics, that creates an incredibly complicated funnel that happens later on, where access to care is incredibly expensive once it goes through the FDA process, right? So access to ibogaine or MDMA or psilocybin for the treatment of depression will be very, very, very expensive, right? And that these companies, while there are certainly some of them that do care about new healing paradigms, I won't doubt that, but lots of them are really profit-driven and are using patented synthetic psychedelic compounds to profit from, right? So, that invites in a pretty big slippery slope. What happens if, say, Compass Pathways COMP360 novel psilocybin pill gets approved through the FDA, and natural mushrooms, which that does not apply to natural mushrooms, by the way, gets left in the liminal space on a federal level. So is the synthetic version somehow becomes legal, and the natural version, which we all know and love and millions of us are using all the time, if that still kind of stays in the gray area, So, systemic change within the mental health community, so much of that emphasis has really been put on the failure of big pharma, right? Which are these gigantic, very nefarious corporations that aren't necessarily interested in healing. They're interested in, symptomatic solutions which don't create transformative results, but rather keep you addicted to their pill forever. We've seen this, for decades and decades, and we all know this. But, wonder if some of the bigger psychedelic corporadelic companies, might follow suit as well, Are we replacing the devil we hate with the devil we know? It's something worth talking about for sure. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen, but I think these are questions that are very, appropriate questions to be asking for sure. And, finally, I have to say, since the veterans really pushed, the needle on this, once again, the veterans have moved the needle with psychedelic research and acceptability more than any other group almost in history. This is from an administration that has gutted the Veterans Administration, has laid off 30,000 people within the VA, has eliminated what suicide prevention care that was already there, that was barely hanging on by a thread. So are we really thinking that this administration cares about the holistic health and well-being of our veteran community? Or is this just kind of a nod to pander to them? It's really hard to take the love and care around the veterans angle in this seriously when we've seen this administration just absolutely treat our veteran community like shit. And now we give them a little bit of a carrot, and it looks like this administration cares about the veteran mental health issue. And I'm not buying that for a second. So while this is progress, it is, I will reluctantly say it, I just think we have to ask the bigger questions. And, are these really the people who you want overseeing psychedelics in America? These people who have done terrible damage to LGBTQ communities, immigrant communities, to our Mother Earth, to climate change regulations, healthcare regulations, and so on. Anyway, here we are. It's happened. The idea is that these medications, these medicines that go through the FDA process and create the formalization of the psychedelic medicalized model, that it changes perception long term, which then carries on over into cognitive liberty, decriminalization, reschedulization, and so on and so forth. So I'm not completely shitting on this win, but I also don't want to just blindly say that this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to psychedelics ever, and while turning a blind eye to the rest of it. I feel pretty strongly about that. So thanks for listening. Enough of that. Let's turn to a word from our sponsor. Hey guys, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Amantara Ethnobotanicals, AMENTARA.com. Amantara exists to restore harmony between plants, people, and spirit through sacred ethnobotanicals like Amanita muscaria and blue lotus. They help to awaken the living intelligence of nature within each individual. Now, when Amantara approached me to sponsor a couple episodes of this podcast, at first, I have to admit, I am not an expert in ethnobotanicals, aside from the typical psychedelic variety that we all know and love. But things like Amanita muscaria, kava, kana, shilajit, and blue lotus, I've done them here and there, but really don't know too much about their origins or who makes the best products. And the good people at Amantara were kind enough to send me a sample pack and for me to dabble into and to take the plunge myself to see how it affected my mind, body, soul, spirit. And sure enough, I was more than pleasantly surprised to feel the synergistic effects of Blue Lotus and Amanita muscaria specifically. They make so many amazing products, and if you head over to amantara.com and use the code LEARY22, you'll get 22% off of your first order. Again, use the code LEARY22. And dive in headfirst to all their amazing heartedelic ethnobotanicals that are so high in integrity and purity that they are leading the category in sourcing these amazing products for our conscious consumption. So head over to amantara.com and check it out. All right, well, let's get into it with Joe Tafur, his new book, Medicine Song, Spiritual Healing, and the Psychedelic Renaissance. I really love this book so much. It's a little bit different than The Fellowship of the River, his first book. It feels very personal, really kind of takes you through his whole evolution, what happened to him at a young age, and how this kind of sparked his whole interest into the study of consciousness. Highly recommend the book. Joe is he's an integrative physician, a Carlin Detta, an author of 2 books, and he continues ongoing collaborations with the academic and spiritual colleagues and his colleagues in Peru and Colombia. Joe is fantastic. I really enjoyed this interview. One thing I do have to say about the interview, a technicality, is that my microphone was not selected to the proper microphone input. So my voice does not sound as good as Joe's. I apologize about that. I will take better care in the future. But here we go, Joe Tafur.
3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Dr. Joe Tafur, welcome to the Psychedelics Then and Now podcast. So good to see you again, man.
Great to see you too, Zach. Thanks for having me. Great to be back.
Yeah, good. Thanks for doing it. It was good to see you in person in Austin last week when you were promoting this book and Medicine Song, Spiritual Healing, and the Psychedelic Renaissance, which of course we're going to talk about. But so many things to ask you. But one thing I was really struck on, and the little get together that we had in Austin, is that you shared a little Icaros Yeah, and I was, really moved by it. And as far as I understand it, it was an Icaros, not an ayahuasca one, but a cacao one. Is that correct?
Coca. No, so
Okay.
it is
Okay.
coca. Yeah, coca leaves. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's Icaro from like for us, like
Mm,
that you would sing an ayahuasca ceremony, and
mm,
for that, but that there's different diets and different plants in the Shipibo tradition, for example, that
yeah.
you would learn from to have the energy of that plant medicine, the way it strikes you, how you would channel it, how you would express it.
So, yeah, so my kind of question was that energy that you receive from the plant and how you express it through song. So, even though that we weren't in ceremony, is that kind of energetic musical remembrance something that's always in you and that you can just summon?
Yes, that's the hope. The
Okay.
hope is that you do develop that connection so that
Mm,
even like this your people teachers that I learn with that they that there would often be, and I have like a segment in the book about, singing to people at the end of the ceremony when your medicine's wearing off and
yeah.
then realizing, oh, they're going to sing to that person in the day just because, they need help. And so they want to use that technique. And then my Navajo friends in Arizona, my friend Daryl, it's always like, Joe, come on, sing your song. Oh, you have to be high to sing your Ikaro. When are you going to get over that? Kind of attitude. So there's a purity of what it is.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
yeah,
And I'm a musician, Western music. Well, I sing some Indian music as well. But yeah, I'm a musician, and what I'm struck by when I hear the Icarus is they're musically, I don't know how to say it, kind of musically very unique in that there isn't really kind of a constant rhythm. They're kind of amorphous and
yeah.
interesting to me because I feel like they were incredibly difficult to learn or to remember rather.
But they're not being remembered. So the amorphousness is because there's an improvised.
Ah,
So it's improvised.
right.
So
Okay.
there might be, I think, across the board, and that there are different traditions. But in the one I learned with my teacher in his school, it's improvised.
Okay.
So you're singing what you're doing in the moment.
Yeah.
And so the energy, the way you're being pulled to sing it in the moment is part of the magic of it.
It's like indigenously tribal psychedelic jazz in a way.
Yeah, that is that's, I think that's the easiest way to describe it. Yeah.
I love that, man. Very, very cool. Well, we're going to revisit this later because I did kind of want to start in chronological order. When I was reading your book, I'm a big fan of Fellowship of the River, and that's a book I recommend to all my students, and it's such a fantastic book. Um, but this book, you start off with your kind of accidental, transcendental experience, that your near-death experience, I think age 16, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about that. But what I'm curious about is like, did you know it at the time? Like, this is a transcendental experience that I am having.
Yes. I mean,
Mm,
I think I did. I mean, in the sense that like a near death experience,
yeah.
I was ejected out of a rolling car. I wasn't the only one. There were three of us that were ejected out, and everyone survived, and was okay. Eventually, had some injuries, but
Yeah.
was able to recover. Um, but during it, yeah, I really did feel like, okay, I'm going to die. I am dying,
Mhm.
and now I've died. And so I did experience that. So that's why I call it a transcendental experience, that I really felt like that was what I talked about was in my experience was like rolling around in the back without the seatbelt, and everything is so violent and chaotic, and you realize, oh my God, like I can't take another one of those. Like my body can't take it. And in a very like things slowed down so much.
Mm,
So it felt like a very real moment of consciousness. And then realizing, but that is going to happen again. And so it's actually too late, and then having that be
mm,
like, oh my God, like your only choice is to let go
yeah.
because it's too late.
Right.
And
Right.
so then that was that. And so then going through that kind of like the transcendence of it in a way, just like not without a lot of visual. I didn't have all the like light or anything, but just this feeling these layers or levels of kind of moving into some other dimension of like, okay, I'm letting go.
Mm.
And it's sad. And it's sad for the people that you're leaving behind. And it's sad for whatever they're going to go through, but I can't stop it.
It's
And so
happening.
it's happening. And this is what's happening. And so you're just like, whoa, what's going to happen next?
Right.
That's when I found myself in this realm, that I described in the book that for me wasn't, I don't know where I was some kind of void, it was just a dark place that was very peaceful, but without any visual light or
Yeah.
just darkness, but peace and no. So I felt myself disembodied. So that's why I felt like that was the transcendental part. That's what I walked away with. That I really it made me experience, or at least in my life journey, that what it was like. Well, this is me as spirit.
Amazing. At that time, when you were, a teenager, were you an especially spiritually inclined teenager?
A little bit,
Yeah.
like I had my family is very religious, Catholic.
Catholic. Yeah.
And yeah, but like I said, Colombia, here I am in Colombia, like
Yeah.
mystical Catholicism influence here in South America, that there's just the saints are every day,
Yeah.
miracles. So this miracle happened over here, that miracle happened over there. That's a big part of our upbringing and my family dreaming of things, my mom having a lot of dreams. My aunt is somebody that was reading tobacco to tell you things about yourself. So there was a lot of that around my childhood that I feel like opened me to that it wasn't so strange to
Mm.
consider something very mystical could happen, or, people could learn things in their dreams, or that there would be, miraculous healings. That was a regular phenomenon. And even today,
Yeah.
like I had a family meeting here in Colombia with some family issues over my grandparents' property that we're going to argue about with lawyers. And my mom sends a photo of like the altar that she's created, that she's praying, and they all know her.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, good, she's praying. And then after we went well, my mom was like, how did the meeting go? Good. Oh, well, you have God to thank, saints were with you. And so it was a big part of my upbringing. My brothers, I maybe didn't take to it as much, but for me, I did take it in.
So it's interesting because, I what I'm hearing is that, the varieties of religious kind of practice and experience, depending on, culture and geography, even in the 21st century today, differ quite a bit. And,
Yes.
I'd say, I mean, the idea of Christian mysticism in the West is something that's kind of gone by the wayside, definitely like, these ideas of, or the real teachings of St. Francis of Assisi, or like these great Christian kind of wild-eyed mystics that were just
Yeah.
pretty out there. But it's fascinating to me that your kind of practice of Catholicism growing up still kind of had a fabric of that woven in, but I don't really see it too much in America, right?
No, I think it's dramatically different
Yeah.
going to Catholic Church in America versus going here in Colombia.
Hmm.
And where, like, I was just telling this story just recently. It was an ayahuasca ceremony, and a very close friend of mine is Dominican, and she grew up going to church, but not really Catholic stuff. But she's had in her ayahuasca vision, she's having these visions of certain saints from the Catholic thing that she's not so sure what to do with.
Hmm.
One of them is this Gregorio from Venezuela, who's very well known here. And so she had this vision and ceremony. She was telling me she didn't know what to do with it. The energy was so strong, and she's been very concerned about Venezuela. And so I told her, well, I don't know. In my family, Gregorio,
Mhm.
like there's in the coast of Colombia and the Caribbean, there's temples for him, and there's guardians, monks of sorts that care for those places. And my cousin, who I just saw earlier today, her husband
Yeah.
had been golfing or something and was having a little bit of double vision, and it was a little like, is that real? Did that happen to me?
Hmm.
And then this lady that used to work with him was on the coast and going to the temple to just do her prayers. And then the guy grabbed her, the guardian of the place, and said, hey, your old boss, he has something wrong with his eyes. Tell him to go to the doctor right now. From
Mm.
like the Temple of Gregorio, right? This is what happens here. Like this is my family.
Yeah.
And so he went and that's how they diagnosed early a brain tumor, was from that guidance. So people can paint that any which way they want. But for us, we say, gracias a los santos.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's very, it's like that's 2026. Like this is happening here every day. There's
Amazing.
people that live this.
And
And
one
so
of
now
my,
that the indigenous and the shamans and the healers that are also here,
yeah,
it's kind of like in India where the gurus are still walking around, and people know whether you believe it or you don't, there they are.
it's just part of it. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
part of the fabric, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I mean, I spend a lot of time in India, and like, even
Yeah.
for the most cosmopolitan young people who are growing up in Mumbai and Delhi who are kind of attracted to Western society, that's still part of the fabric, the sadhu
Right.
looking around the neighborhood. It's just, and they're all aware of it. But one of my favorite, or I think one of the most potent kind of examples of this is for those who are very familiar with the story of Marina Sabina and Gordon Wasson
Mhm.
going down there and for the first mushroom experience, is that the mushroom experience, they were speaking in Mixteco and had, various kind of local, idolatry, but they had Catholic saints as part of their ceremony as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating stuff, right?
But that's a big thing here, like in
Yeah.
with the Spaniards, the Lady of Guadalupe, in
Mm.
Mexico is an apparition of the Virgin that was for the indigenous. And so she's like a patron saint in Mexico, but
Okay.
throughout Latin America, regarded to be, she arrived here to show herself not just for the Catholic, the Spaniards, but for the indigenous.
Oh,
And so, yeah, there's many of those stories. And so it's very common, and it's colonial, post-colonial era in Shipibo land, in Navajo land.
mm.
But you see, I take my mom. My mom's so worried about, oh, you're getting involved with these people. And I said, well, the Navajo medicine man I go to, behind him, when he does this thing, is a huge thing of Jesus Christ, you know? And
Yes.
you see that. And so it's part of the fusion
Yeah.
that is very much alive here, that doesn't, I don't know, it's not so much about taking sides. Although there is, there's colonial, tragedy and all that, but still you do see a lot of that.
Yeah.
And Los Niños Santos, like what Maria Sabina, I think, refers to the mushrooms,
Yeah.
they related to Jesus Christ. And that's from what I hear. And so it's divinities. For us, it's like this. It's
Right.
divinity. And so
Period.
it's the many faces of divinity
Right.
show themselves, just like the Hindus, there's like
One God, a thousand masks.
one God, there live 1,000 faces.
Yeah, a thousand faces. So what is, if you're able to define this, maybe what is the Shipibo, I guess, view or definition of God? What is God in that tradition?
Yeah, I'm not an expert of that exact question. I can say like Ricardo, my teacher. I mean, the Shipibo is a culture, but I mean from you hear different people, anthropology. Oh, this is what it used to be. They thought of God like this before the Spanish came, or it's kind of all legendary
Mm.
and mixed. Ricardo, who I was just visiting with, he happened to be visiting Vancouver, and we spent some time together. And people were asking these kind of questions, and his kind of answer was, God is love, God is light, like the
Mm.
divine light. And something like that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
there's no like personification of Godhead necessarily?
There can be personifications or even like manifestations.
Mm.
So then among the faces of God, just like whether it's Jesus or the Buddha or is Mother Nature. So that's something that's kind of been lost in the Western, that used to be more regarded, that the creation itself or the Mother Nature
Mm.
is a face of the divinity. And so all of the plants, it's not that any one of them is God, but they are can be a manifestation of that divinity. So we can go back through relationship to the plants, through coca, to, through that, whatever personification, however, but through a relationship that we can establish, and then use that connection
Mm.
to ask then the coca to use its connection to help us connect to the transcendent.
Right. So hence the idea that the plants are our teachers, right?
Yes.
Yes. And the different plants have different kind of characteristics or,
But that at some level,
yeah.
and the most transcendent, that it is transcends form.
Mm.
So in their ultimate relationship to divinity, it could transcend all form. And so then whatever, maybe I diet this plant, but that plant could maybe teach me about the other plant through
Right.
this transcendent connection. Maybe I can't know all the plants, because I didn't diet all the plants, but I can, through this channel,
Yeah.
learn about things through that connection.
And
So there are characteristics, but then there is a formless
a formlessness to it.
más allá, like we say in Spanish, that which is beyond this.
Oh, right. Okay. And, but then that formlessness too can also take on
Form.
kind of a characteristic of like, hey, it can directly kind of teach you and you can form a relationship with, even though it's formless, you can still form a
It
relationship.
would take on a form in
Right.
such a way for you to receive.
To receive. So, you know, these ideas, right? This is all to me like, you know, really the essence of, you know, indigenous medicine use, right? And when we, you know, we see this modern kind of take on, you know, psychedelics being fused into capitalism and becoming product very, very quickly. It's happening whether we like it or not. You know, but just pick ayahuasca, for example. I'm sure we could dissect each and every medicine, but taking ayahuasca, you know, and this idea of like fusing ayahuasca into a product that is void from everything that we just spoke about, and is just focusing on the pharmacology of it to benefit XYZ, whatever it may be.
Right.
Isn't that kind of missing the whole point?
Well, I would say that it's missing a lot. You
Yeah.
know, so it's kind of like it's missing a lot. And so, you know, that kind of story that they've, you know, which is, I always bring it up, like it's just a sales pitch, you know, that, okay, so Prozac, you know, that they've got it down to this little biomolecule that's going to interfere with this receptor, and that's it. And that's all you need. But then
Right.
all the research shows that, well, if you have therapy involved, it's better, it's more effective. So it's kind of an empty sales pitch that's not
Mhm.
even connected to what was actually being practiced with other medications. You know, that all the medications are existing within this context. And if it was as simple as X plus Y, you know, this is just one, two, three,
Right.
like I said, with, you know, blood pressure medication, it's like so diverse what the different human physiologies respond to, no matter what the studies showed as far as safety parameters and, you know, average doses and what's a safe, you know, upper dose and all that. But then when you in practice, you see these people on totally different, you know, and psychiatric medication, no question that there's just such a diversity of how they're being used. So this claim that they've dialed it in so perfectly is just kind of empty.
It's empty, and it's also kind of troubling to me because it's sort of like, you know, one example that I often use is yoga in the West, right? You
Right.
know, the way yoga has been distilled into the Western idiom is that, oh, you know, yoga is an intense exercise class and you go and you sweat and you move your body with literally no mention of its roots or the spiritual tradition or the science of it or, you know, the eight
Right.
model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just become an exercise class that they teach at the gym. So, you know, taking that metaphor and juxtaposing it against psychedelics, especially the sacred plant medicines, you know, I just, you know, there's so much chatter in our community about, you know, all of these huge advancements and policy changes and things like that. But like even your book, it's about spiritual healing and the psychedelic renaissance, spiritual
Right.
healing within the psychedelic renaissance. So
Right.
do you feel,
And that the psychedelic renaissance is shining the light on spiritual healing.
Is it though? Okay, there you go. Is
I
it?
would say it is. I
Okay.
would say it is, and that's
All
part of the argument of the book.
right.
And so, like for example, you know, the mushroom research, psilocybin
Yep.
research, that has definitely opened up a lot of mystical, spiritual discussion within the medical establishment. Like, no question.
Mm.
Like it's establishing the mystical experience, the CERT experience, spiritual, existential, religious, theological experience,
Yep.
as clinically relevant in a validated, proven way, established by objective measure. And so then that activity, and as they try to pare it down to make the studies cheaper to run to just one session and not a lot of support, and do we really need the songs? Do we really need this? Do we really need that? But while they do all that, they've been encouraging the society to appreciate the substance enough to make it legal. That whole mushrooms are now being decriminalized because of the research.
Yeah.
I don't think you can deny the influence of the research for people to establish the safety and
No, I
the harm
absolutely not.
reduction.
Yes.
So now decriminalized in Colorado, decriminalized in Washington, in
Yeah.
Colorado, movements to decriminalize in so many other places. Now whole mushrooms being prescribable in New Mexico from doctors,
Yeah.
and there's a movement there. So just as an example, so that's what's happening. So they might say, oh, we're going to get it. And, I've talked to the head of USONA, who's one of the companies that produces psilocybin for research studies for Johns Hopkins and other places. And I'm like, well, what if all that comes out of this is you just legalize mushrooms? And, they're fine with that. Like that may be what comes out of it, because, what we observe in the Oregon situation where they have these service centers,
Yeah.
it's not working that well financially.
It's
What
too
they're trying to
expensive.
accomplish. Huh?
It's too expensive.
It's too expensive. So,
Yeah.
but people are still working with mushrooms
Yeah.
in other contexts.
Yeah. 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 But no, but look, I agree with the foundational argument that the research and the medicalized model has, for better, more than for worse, has informed the general public around safety and efficacy and all of this. No question. And it's changed the minds of those whose minds needed changing the most. People
Yes.
like you and I were already, our minds are changed.
Right.
It's fine. So I get that part. But I still have this tremendous fear that like these regulated models and establishment kind of criteria for the dissemination of plant medicines, not synthetics too, just of all psychedelics, is that they're presenting this model that is sterilized, is a white room with, doctors and regulated therapists and that this is more of a practice of medicine than it is of spirit.
And a lot of people will go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it just concerns me that, it's like it's kind of like the bumper sticker. This is why we can't have beautiful things,
I think they're going to try, but I just don't believe
Mm.
that, a simple example is when I was going through medical school, more or less, Marinol, was the product that they
Or
had
the
developed.
THC thing.
THC Marinol.
right.
So it was like a pill. So now they could go through the whole system, and they're always coming up with new products that can be billed by insurance and things like that. And Marinol was supposed to offer appetites, stimulation, cancer, chemotherapy, and
HIV
sleep,
patients.
pain, HIV.
Yeah.
So that whole era, and it was just a bust.
Mm.
The smoking of it was so much better. The whole flower delivery, the people didn't want to bother. They weren't impressed with the product.
Right.
So they're trying to sell the product as they do. And, it's very impressive, the, marketing and shoving things down people's throats and how we end up in this culture that we're in.
Yeah.
But there are other forces, there's other forces, and there's people that don't want to do that. And, even with wine, it's just like there's all these all over the place wineries of this kind and that kind that still flourish despite, alcohol production and delivery in some kind of cheap, fast way. I just think there's still, the culture still breathes, you know. And I know it doesn't feel like in America, we always feel like they're just going to bring that big brother thing. I'm here in Colombia where, life is still so alive
Yeah.
that people don't really fear that.
Right.
We're not going to do it.
Yeah.
They've gone along with it to a point, but they don't, and so you get into these places where, and you have in Arizona, the University of Arizona Center for Integrated Medicine, which I'm affiliated with, and they had a big grant, and they have continued funding coming through Coors, because Coors is like, we're kind of tired of this medical establishment trying to tell us what's healthy, what's not healthy. We want people to make some of their own decisions because we're old country style Coors, and we don't buy it, So I mean, there's that energy still breathes.
Yeah, and I was, very encouraged by the latest RAND report on the psychedelic numbers that came out. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of people here using these compounds, and the numbers were so high that it kind of had me scratching my head on the entire regulated model. I'm like, oh, wait a second. All these people aren't going to Colorado and Oregon. This is millions of people. So it's finding its way here anyway. So
regulated use is making them comfortable with it, as we discussed.
Yeah. The regulated use is making it comfortable. And, me being, I'm, in the words of Jerry Garcia, pathologically anti-authoritarian, and that cognitive liberty is still, it'll still find its way there. And if people want to develop relationships with these things or not, the legality is kind of whatever. It's not really a thing,
And then it is terrible. And, the war on drugs and all the ways that's impacted, all these people in your life and everywhere else, but so it's so heavy and it's wrong. And we just had a ayahuasquero, somewhere traveling, and then he's being held in this country, being held in that country, somebody that from their culture would be considered a holy person.
Mm.
And because of this ignorance, they're going to, just like all the people put away from marijuana. It's a terrible tragedy. And so the threat is real.
Mm.
The threat is real. The question is, are we making progress against the threat or not? And one progress is the case of marijuana. Well, it's like widely legalized.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And pretty much, just it's pushing that way. And some, Canada legalized, Germany legalized.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing that kind of shift is what's come out of all this activity. I think that there's more mind opening by having it out there. And so the system that you say that thinks that they're going to profit from it, that they're getting involved, but that's kind of a secondary wave. The hardcore initiation of these research studies from MAPS, from, everyone that's been Beckley, all these people that got it going, it wasn't from that. It was a nonprofit fundraising to get the ball rolling. And then the venture capital shows up because they think, oh my God,
this is
time to catch in.
Yeah.
Either way, we got to catch it. But then once they see that it's really not the profit margins that they thought it would be, it drifts back down to mental health care and, consciousness explorers.
Yeah, and just overall general wellness,
In general wellness.
Yeah.
So if they don't have an angle, and so you see it like with, the ketamine clinics are an interesting, so there's pump and dump, they're trying to really get it down to nothing.
Yeah.
But I just feel like as the good examples come forward and come up with models that are supported enough that people can afford somehow to get therapy, get support, or even ceremony, or all the different layers and levels that they might be able to get, that'll demonstrate itself over time.
Well, the ketamine clinic example is a really good example of all of this to me, because all ketamine clinics are not created equal.
Yes.
There are many ketamine clinics, even here in Austin, where it's literally KO, run by a group of medical professionals who have zero experience with the medicine. There's no KAP offer. You're literally go into a room, they give you an injection. None of the support staff understands non-ordinary states of consciousness, and they look at it, and that's their thing. But then there are some ketamine clinics, hey, they're really good. There's a therapist in the room with you and trying their best to squeeze a little mysticism into it.
And so I was in Austin, that
Yeah,
weekend with you because I was at the ketamine conference.
yeah.
And I went and I had heard this one that's being held in Austin every year in Austin's because it's a good vibe over there. They said, we want to do it in Austin. And I heard, oh, it's such a medical conference, Joe. It's just all medicalized ketamine. You're not going to. So I was like, yeah, I don't want to go to that, but I'm going to go and try to promote the book. And then you're there, Austin. I got to go to Austin and meet these other people. And so it was worth it. And then I went and the people I was meeting there,
Hmm.
I met a lot of wonderful people there, including the leadership of the conference that I was kind of like, because they had told me, I went with my friends Geeta and Monica, and they're like, Joe, we want you to do a song at the thing and during our presentation. And I really am not for that, like just performing or bringing something sacred into that kind of environment. I don't feel necessarily good about that in general.
Yeah.
But in meeting the people and being there and seeing the direction and the kind of data that they were presenting, including data supporting CAP, the evidence based, like, hey, this is way better. And you can try to argue against it. Here's the arguments for it. And it was kind of strong. I mean, there was a mix of things there. And there's the full materialist, they just want to do transcranial magnets and ketamine drugs and, not even talk to you about whatever was wrong. But that's not all they're doing. And some of those people are trying therapy and trying ceremony, and they're still not better. So they try the magnets too, this integrative kind of model. And I don't know, I just found them very open. And so I was happy to
Yeah.
see the community because I was like, this is the community from the doctor's side that is really going to be the one that puts out the psilocybin clinics or whatever it is,
Yeah.
the MDMA, the ketamine. They're setting themselves up to be ready for that.
That's the whole idea there, right?
And there's a mix, but in that mix, they're being exposed regularly to these phenomena. And that's what I said when I was, I brought this story up here and there, but when I worked this ketamine clinic, and there was a nurse that was Christian that was somehow offended, back to this whole take sides over somebody put a Native American prayer on the wall. That was just kind of an open-minded, open-hearted thing, but they made a stink. And it was because they didn't like being there and they didn't like what was going on there. It was uncomfortable. So we had to have a meeting with the staff and they're like, hey, everybody, this place is like McDonald's, okay? Like it's just same, everybody gets the same. Don't get into any tricky stuff, just let's keep it bland, let's keep it sterile. And so then I said to the guy, I'm like, hey man, you don't want to get involved in anything spiritual. But like earlier today, somebody talked to their deceased loved one in that room. In this room, somebody, left the cosmos. And in that room, this person had some kind of conversation with what they believe is God. And so I was like, it's just a little too late for you, my friend. Like you say you don't want to be part of it. You're in deep. Like you already made your decision. So you can act like it's not happening under your nose.
But it will happen.
It will happen.
Yeah, totally. No, there's no question about it. I mean, I find, a great number of people come to me for medicine assistance via ketamine clinics because something has woken up inside of them.
Yeah.
They have this little spark of something that is not what they came for, but they got it anyway. And they go on the internet, they start digging in, and they realize there's a whole other world around this, and they seek out other methodologies.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's a human thing. It's a humanity thing. I was on in the early days of releasing the Fellowship of the River. I got invited to some podcasts with these guys from Phoenix. They're just these blue collar guys that are exploring these topics. And we were just, I was trying to get off on one topic, and the guy's like, no, I don't think, he's like, I think I have the guy tells me, he's like, I have a pretty good sense of what, I don't know what the 10% is doing, but I have a pretty good idea about the 90%. And he says, the 90%, they know something's wrong. He's like, they know something's wrong. Something is wrong. That was one guy. And then the other guy, like the little quote I put in the book, is like these guys who were showing up. I was the screening doctor at the ketamine clinic. So you're like, okay, why did you come? And then there would be whispering like, well, I heard you guys could help me find something spiritual. I think that's what I need. Something spiritual is missing. Is it true that you can help me open that? That would come in pretty regularly. So that those whispers that you're talking about,
Yeah.
that for us here in Colombia, we say, that's, la gente, like the people, the humanity, like it's a AWA is breathing and it just comes up from the children from everywhere.
So, the place that you occupy in the world, I mean, do you still have an active family medicine practice? Like,
No,
no,
I'm
not so much.
getting involved in integrative medicine,
Yeah.
and we're in the process of maybe securing a space to open a clinic that will be kind of an integrative medicine space that will be also ketamine clinic and CAP and other things. And
Uh,
so I'm
uh,
getting involved. And so family medicine. I'm part of the organization, and I read the journals, but I'm doing less just straight primary care.
But, even so, a lot of your career in life has been, in interactions with the medical establishment,
Yes,
right? Let's
yes.
say, have you,
I teach at the medical school. Yeah.
yeah. So over the course of, let's say the last decade, to me, I think is sort of like a good time frame. Have you
Mhm.
seen the medical establishments, kind of relationship to altered states of consciousness through the psychedelic portal? Like, how have you seen it change?
Yeah, I think I think there's those people they find the resistance or they find, but I see it opening up first. Every major medical school has to have a psychedelic. Before they had to have an integrative medicine program to be competitive. And then now they need functional medicine somehow to be competitive. So I'm saying, like Harvard,
Mm.
Stanford, UCLA, whatever, UT Austin. And then now they need a psychedelic center. UT Austin has one.
Yep.
Johns Hopkins, UCSF, UCLA,
Yeah.
UCSD, they all have it. It's kind of standard to be competitive in the field, to attract students. If you have a psychiatry program or even integrated program and you're not even involved in this, so I think that is inviting it into the door. Like we said, this ketamine clinic, they go, oh, hey, we don't want to go there. Let's not go there, but they're letting it in. So then my friend Rael is a PI at psilocybin research at USC. And in the neuroscience lab, now they had to convert one of the rooms to a psychedelic therapy room. And now they're doing psilocybin in there. And it's there under their noses, and they've got MRIs right over there and this EEG, and it's all right there. So I think that in the last 10 years, it's been an explosion of that.
So, I
And you
mean,
see UT Austin, just as an example, UT
yeah,
Austin.
sure.
And we were there. We met the lady, our friend, Venezuelan fundraiser, like
Yeah.
18 million.
Yeah.
And so it's hot. And so then also the money flow, whether they think it's for venture capital or whatever, but there's money coming in that's establishing the practice.
So, I mean, moving forward, well, we've talked a lot about how, psychedelics, even if it's somebody's intention or not, can awaken, a mystical yearning or a seed inside of somebody's heart, whatever the medicine may be.
Yeah.
But for the most part, a lot of these models that we're talking about, they're still focused on mental health issues, kind of the big five, addiction,
Sure.
anxiety, trauma, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But how can we, shift the conversation? And this is like, something like you occupy the space,
Yeah.
better than most medical doctors. How can we shift this regulated model into spiritual wellness as a legal intention?
Right.
Please.
So then that's over the course of the book, and that's what the book's called, the subtitle Spiritual Healing and Psychedelic Renaissance.
Yep.
I just bring up, things that sparked my interest of the psychedelic clinical research that happened over the last 30 years. And as we go further into these last 10 years, you see this increasing presence within the medical model and in the medical journals of the influence of considering the way that psychedelic therapies are affecting people by improving their emotional processing, affecting neuronal networks, all that stuff, but also the shifting spiritual well-being. And that as they try to find measurable, valid measures, meaning that you could use them again and again and use them to try to predict people's mental health care outcomes. That they come up with more, like in the connectedness scale. Like this is now a growing measure that, like, if you want to show that you have a good ketamine clinic, like if you wanted to market it, it'd be worth your while to show that you're increasing connectedness scales in your patients, because that's been clinically correlated to improve mental health care outcomes. And so what that speaks to is that this spiritual awakening, like you mentioned, that may or may not happen or may happen accidentally, but that actually what the person's healing required was some kind of spiritual awakening.
Yes. And
go ahead.
And then in that section of your book, the expanded spiritual well-being and improved emotional regulation is like really encapsulates that idea, I think.
Exactly. And that's based on my experience working with people and down there in the jungle, but it's also based in following some of the research.
Yeah.
And the arguments that have come out of the research that are people trying to demonstrate what are the repeatable facts here. And they're showing that. And like I like to bring up that yes, the mystical experience and how mystical was it, that's one factor. Another factor that's had a lot of clinical correlation is emotional breakthrough, that they've actually like experienced the subjective emotional breakthrough. Another one is the connectedness scale, and there are others, nature connectedness as a subset of that, that's shifting these kind of things for people. And then the other one was like this process from the NYU research with alcoholics is like, okay, there was they said even more salient than the mystical stuff was,
Mm.
forgiveness, compassion,
Yeah.
self-love, gratitude.
Yeah.
So if those four things are crucial
Right.
to your holistic healing and keep coming up in the realms of psychology, psychiatry, and Western medicine, then how do you help people with those things? Those are areas that were traditionally kind of handled by, religious organization or spiritually oriented communities that would really say, hey, we got to deal with this stuff at a transcendent level, because it's going to be really hard for you to accept this trauma that you've been through without considering, your experience beyond the lifespan.
And that is, you're referring to the alcoholism study at NYU. I'm a recovering addict, non-alcoholic, but drug user, and those things, self-forgiveness, gratitude, all of this. I mean, that's the crux of why someone became an addict in the first place. Lack of those things. So if
go ahead.
No,
interweaving right there between of spiritual well-being and mental health is clear. So that, addiction becomes a very obvious, because you have the people who go through the medical interventions, but then they drift maybe into the community, let's say AA or NA or someplace like that, where it's about this social support, walking people through forgiveness, self-love, compassion, gratitude, and acceptance, and the spiritual possibility that there's some wider possibility available from them to draw from.
Yeah.
That there's some kind of unconditional love that exists in the universe that they may need to draw upon. And how can we help them connect to that?
Mm. So, one thing I'm really curious as to your take on. I mean, I know you have spent a lot of time in the ketamine world, but I still consider you mainly a plant medicine guy,
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But still, I was really curious on your take on kind of the absence of synthetic compounds in this kind of, at least in the regulated legal rollout of what we see, like Colorado, Oregon, and as those are taking on other states now, the synthetics, LSD, MDMA, the MDMA FDA application failed. I'm sure it'll eventually go through, but that's just for, the application of PTSD. How do we see a future of the synthetics? And this is something I talk to the Shulgin Foundation people a lot, because, people who are in that community, we're kind of like, hey, what happened? Where did they go? There's still such a stigma around them.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that this pathway towards gaining more, there was like with LSD and MDMA, apparently, more increased stigma, right? Maybe in the society, or there at least from the law, or there was a, that was the tip of the spear, LSD, and
Yeah.
basically close to home, and so. And and then you have Albert Hoffman and LSD wunderkind or problem child, and like his thing of like, okay, so that was maybe like in this really strong movement when the authoritarian forces came down hard, obviously for all the reasons they tried to come down hard, but then the counter argument is like, well, they were giving it to too many vulnerable people who were poorly prepared. So then it has that stigma around it, like, oh, that was too loose, so that was too maybe. So, and then clinically, like in medicine, perhaps some of the longer lasting, ones, LSD's maybe a longer trip. It's like that's a bigger deal to have therapists. The ibogaine clinics that they're going to be with you for days, and to create a scenario like that. So working towards whatever containers that are going to hold the longer experience. There's been this resistance, but meanwhile, like because of all this other work, I mean, there is LSD clinical research. Even in Phoenix, I was surprised. I went to our little Arizona Psychedelic Society conference that somebody put on, and there was a psychiatrist there who's running LSD clinical trials for anxiety right now. So it is alive. It has, been there. And so it's lagging behind these other ones. Is it because of the stigma? I mean, they try to choose things, that would be more palatable in a way.
Natural medicine is more palatable than
not trigger so much. But I think inevitably, yes, it deserves its respect. And the MDMA, there's, we see it already in Australia, moving forward, and Canada, and I think it's gonna flip here. We won't have to. I don't imagine that. Do they have to do the studies if it's already working great in Australia? Like they did it based on our studies. Can we move? Can they they are really looking at that. They're looking at that again. Well, so I think the future is towards more legalization and more support and more openness. And there may be resistance, but I think as the arguments build towards the safety and understanding, that those things should come back. And, LSD psychotherapy and all those, which are kind of foundational, as these programs, psychedelic therapy programs develop, I mean, that you have to look at some of their work. Yeah. Right. You have to go back to that and learn from that.
Oh my God. I mean, that work, I mean, especially the early LSD research, I think is some of the most pivotal work around psychedelic assisted therapy,
It is, and so it's an important pillar of the thing. And so then it's also like, I think just an add to a piece of that with the synthetics, one thing that I like from the plant medicine world, and, when I touch on the ketamine, my advice to come into, so-called right relationship to that, it's like, okay, and here I think there is that, but, how do you make it? What is it made out of? Do we know where it comes from? Can we have like a more conscious process from, whatever, from the chemistry lab to the experience? That's something that, with the ayahuasqueros, that's not everyone is so careful with that, but that is one of the goals. You have a more conscious experience if we can really dial it in all the way down the line. And, ketamine is far from that. Yeah. I can never find anyone to tell me where they make it or how they make it, or
where it comes from
India or something. Yeah. And, what are the chemicals that they use? What do they start with? And what are the people thinking about when they're doing it? So moving towards that, I think synthetics, they have a place and they have a role. And, I'm down here to do ceremony with my good close friend and colleague, Xochipupuru, indigenous Colombian ayahuasquera, Yajecera, who came to Arizona to visit, and we brought her to the ketamine clinic, and she had never tried any synthetic before. It wasn't LSD. It wasn't, something else. It was ketamine. And she had a beautiful experience.
Amazing.
And, we supported her with a lot of support, and I sang to her when she's on ketamine and all that. But she said, and she gave a little video clip, testimonial, because it was so beautiful for her. And she said, this, if you hold this right, it can take you to the same place.
Mm.
And so then, but for her message, and I have her message at the end of the medicine song, is like, okay, there is a place that we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
That, whether it's Ram Dass or whoever, like that, there's a divinity that we're trying to open the door to, whether we get through prayer, meditation, yoga, or if the psychedelics or the sacred plant medicines help us access. But that's something that exists, and the medicines help us to relate to that.
Mm.
But ultimately, it's that.
Yes.
So we could put too much on which substance for this and which substance for that versus like, okay, how is it going with your consciousness?
Right. And also too, how's it going with your consciousness? And I, the longer I'm around and in this field, the more subjective I find people's relationships with different compounds. Some people, they don't take to the ayahuasca experience, but they take the MDMA experience, or vice versa.
Yes.
And it's really just about fine tuning what's right for your evolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree that there should be diversity.
Yeah.
Available, and everybody, that's what they say here, para todos los gustos, los sabores, for all the different tastes that people have, all the different flavors.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, your book, Medicine Song, Spiritual Healing and the Psychedelic Renaissance, it's out now?
Yes, it's out. It's out in book and Audible, on Kindle.
And you read the audiobook?
I read the audiobook, and I listened to your book on audio, and I enjoyed it very much. Yeah, it's fun to read the books. I think you do a better job reading than me, but I'm working on it.
It was fun to read it, though, huh? It was hard.
Yeah.
I had a hard time doing it.
It's hard.
It's hard.
I have a friend who's a vocal coach that was in my ear coaching me as I did it.
Yeah, I had the producer from the publisher who does all their audiobooks. She was in my ear while I was.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, this is hard.
Yeah, no, it's
But
long.
your book is out now. Thanks for taking the time, Joe, and have a great retreat in Colombia. Man. It's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach. Great to speak with you.
Of course. All right. Thank you for listening. We'll be back really soon with another great episode featuring Mike Fanoia, the great comic, and a newfound voice of psychedelic wisdom. Had a great conversation with him, and we'll be back really soon with that. Thanks for listening.